Just a heads up today. This episode is going to be about some pretty heavy stuff that could be rather triggering for some. You won't be hearing from me much this time because these stories are personal and genuine, and they deserve to be told without interruption. Every one of these women came forward because they want everyone listening to know that miscarriage needs to be discussed, and that those who have suffered, those up to 20% of pregnancies that have tragically ended, don't have to deal in silence if they don't want to. I do want to take a moment to thank Tasha, Pam, and Claire for trusting us with their stories, and I want to thank you for listening to them. And with that, let's go on with the show.
Hi, my name is Claire. My husband and kids and I live in Happy Valley, Oregon, and we have been married for 5 years. And we have 3 kiddos. Our oldest is 4, we have a 2.5-year-old, and then our littlest one is 10 months. We have been very fortunate that it's been very easy for us to get pregnant. However, our journey has sadly included 2 losses. We were married, I think it was just a couple of months, and found out we were expecting. Shortly after, I think it was only maybe a week or 2 weeks after we had found out, I started noticing some bleeding and some heavy cramping. Went into a doctor. I had not even really had a first OB appointment yet since it was still so new. It was scary that was my first experience with pregnancy, and seeing an OBGYN was thinking that I was already having a miscarriage. They couldn't find anything. They did an ultrasound. They couldn't see anything. So they sent me for a bunch of blood work. They ran levels. For anyone who's listening that has been through pregnancy, has been through fertility treatments, anything that knows these kind of numbers, they will often screen your blood to test for HCG, and they can see from that how high your levels are, how far along in pregnancy you are. And so they wanted to run this blood work on me to kind of see where things were at. And they could see from these results that my numbers were still rising. So that told them that it was an ectopic pregnancy, which, again, for those of you that don't know what that is, it basically just means that you are pregnant, but it's not viable, and it is somewhere else outside of your uterus where it cannot thrive. So again, they couldn't find it. They couldn't find it in either of my tubes, which is normally where an ectopic pregnancy is. So I had to go through some rather painful injections in the tushy, and that basically just ended whatever pregnancy there was. And from there, it was more heavy bleeding, more cramping, a really hefty emotional roller coaster, a lot of going into the doctor and rescreening my blood levels, and a lot more tests. And in the midst of all of that, I really didn't get a chance to emotionally experience it. I didn't get a chance to grieve what it was, to really process through everything. There was so many doctor's visits and so many medical things going on that I was just focused on the physical aspect. And I was very focused on healing and just recovering physically so that we could get pregnant again. And once my levels reached 0 and we got the A-OK to try again, I got pregnant immediately after. So again, with getting pregnant right away, I never processed through it. I kind of just let that be a part of my history, and I moved forward, and I went on to have a really healthy pregnancy, delivered our son Malachi, and then about a year after he was born, we had our daughter Addie, and then when Addie was about a year, I found out I was pregnant again, and both times, I think from the very beginning, I could sense that something was wrong. I don't know if it was my body telling me something, but I had this feeling again that something wasn't quite right. I was really anxious about things. I felt really nervous about it. I kept taking pregnancy tests to see that I was still pregnant. And then sure enough, some bleeding started. This time, however, I went into the doctor and they could see something. They were able to find a sac, and they said that I was likely just still early, just about 5 weeks. And, the spotting was probably just some semi-normal early pregnancy spotting. So, and it did stop. So I went on to think that things might be okay, and went several more weeks until I was probably about 8 weeks pregnant. And then I woke up in the middle of the night to my son having a bad dream. And I can remember going into him, and then the cramping started. And then I used the restroom and I noticed the bleeding started, and I knew it. I knew right then what was happening. I told my husband, I know what this is. I know it's going to happen. And I just want it to happen quickly at this point. I don't want to have to go through this again, so I just want it to go fast. And it did. I think the next day, the cramping got really, really severe, and the bleeding got really severe. So I knew I had a history of strong bleeding, so that made me a little bit nervous. And the cramping, again, having experienced delivering a child before, the cramping was very, very similar to labor pains. So I knew I felt like I was experienced enough in pregnancy that I knew what was happening. I knew that I was losing the baby. So I called my husband. I called my parents because my husband wasn't able to come to me right away. My parents came over. They took me to the emergency room. And the emergency room doctors basically, so early on, there's nothing that they can do. So they basically just sent me home, and they were not super sympathetic about it. They were very medical about it, which I'm not going to lie, in the moment, it kind of helped. It kind of helped me to, again, feel off my emotions and just kind of go through the process of, okay, examine me, check me out, get me out of here, because this is horrible and I don't really want to sit here anymore. But in hindsight, it was pretty awful. I mean, the doctors just were not very sympathetic. She was very much just, speaking in terms like, okay, well, I searched through and I think I found remains of the baby, which now in hindsight, thinking about that, I mean, that's a pretty awful, horrifying thing to hear. So I went home and, I let myself cry, I let myself grieve, but then things got really severe. My emotions went really haywire, and I ended up developing really severe postpartum depression and anxiety from it. So it was a lot. That was an especially difficult process. I think that the first ectopic pregnancy kind of piled onto that one, and I was reliving both of them at the same time and trying to process through and work through both of them. And it was a lot. I mean, we were, again, really fortunate and blessed that we have really a really strong network of family and friends that surrounded us during that time, and they brought us meals and supported us in any way that they could. And I think that really helped get me through things, and I was able to speak up and get help. And my doctor was amazing, and she got me the right kind of help and the right kind of treatment plan. And so I recovered very quickly, I feel like. In a weird way, I'm kind of grateful for that experience, because it kind of forced me to correctly process through my losses and acknowledge that they were losses, acknowledge that that those were our children too, and we lost them. And I feel like I learned a really great tip. I ended up going to therapy, and I learned a great tip in therapy that it helps, even though they were early miscarriages, it still helps to name them, because any miscarriage at 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 11 weeks, 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 14 weeks, 15 weeks, 16 weeks, 17 weeks, 18 weeks, 19 weeks, 20 weeks, 21 weeks, 22 weeks, 23 weeks, 24 weeks, 25 weeks, 26 weeks, 27 weeks, 28 weeks, 29 weeks, 30 weeks, 31 weeks, 32 weeks, 33 weeks, 34 weeks, 35 weeks, 36 weeks, 37 weeks, 38 weeks, 39 weeks, 40 weeks, 41 weeks, 42 weeks, 43 weeks, 44 weeks, 45 weeks, 46 weeks, 47 weeks, 48 weeks, 49 weeks, 50 weeks, 51 weeks, 52 weeks, 53 weeks, 54 weeks, 55 weeks, 56 weeks, 57 weeks, 58 weeks, 59 weeks, 60 weeks, 61 weeks, 62 weeks, 63 weeks, 64 weeks, 65 weeks, 66 any place in your pregnancy is still significant. It's going to impact you in whatever way it does. And, that varies from woman to woman, and everybody has their own different beliefs, and no miscarriage is insignificant. And I think that was a big takeaway for me too. I kept thinking that, well, the first one was ectopic, and this one was still so early in the first trimester. Am I allowed to be this upset about it? Am I allowed to be this heartbroken? And I felt kind of silly at times. And my therapist really helped me to acknowledge that I had a right to mourn them and I had a right to grieve them. And so I got the opportunity to name our children and to get a chance to say goodbye to them and to move forward. And again, we were fortunate yet again, and got pregnant shortly after and had our third baby, who is now almost a year. So our story has a lot of really, really beautiful aspects to it, but it has been difficult for sure. Give yourself a chance to process it alone. I mean, I think that there's a lot of, definitely, absolutely process through it with your spouse and the people important in your life. But I think it's really important to process through it on your own too, because there's a lot that your body goes through, and it's a lot to work through. So I think that a big thing is just take a beat and be by yourself and go someplace that you're comfortable, that you can get into your own headspace and do whatever you need to do, scream, cry, write in a journal, sing a song, whatever it is, and just give yourself a chance to process through it in the way that you need to by yourself. And then I think the second thing, to recognize that whether you were 4 weeks pregnant or 12 or 20, or if it was a stillbirth, that they are all important, they are all significant, and you have a right to grieve every single one of those losses, no matter what.
My husband and I always knew that we wanted to have kids. And prior to being with my husband, I always knew that I wanted to have kids. And so when we finally started trying a couple years after we got married, I think we kind of took for granted how easy we thought it was to get pregnant, I guess. Kind of always thought, through no help of my mother, that you just kind of get pregnant really easily, and you have to be super careful because all you have to do is sleep with someone once and then you're pregnant, and it's that easy all along. And so when we did not have that experience, it was really difficult. We started just kind of casually trying with like no pressure, no expectations really. A year, and it was kind of conveniently timed because we were in another state where I was teaching and we were separated from friends and family. So it's kind of like, yeah, we're trying, but if it doesn't happen right now, it's totally fine. We're not going to stress about it. And then we moved back to Oregon and kind of started to like ramp it up and get a little concerned as to why it wasn't happening after a year. And we started going in for testing and all that fun poking and prodding, and finally got diagnosed as infertile, which I don't know if people are like me, but sometimes I like getting a diagnosis because I at least know what I'm working with and I know what I need to do to overcome it. And infertility is not like that at all, because it's still just this big freaking question mark. They're like, yeah, you're infertile, but we have no idea why. So have fun with that. And so, they had us tracking stuff, and we started hormone therapy treatment, which was horrible because it was like being in early menopause. All the side effects were terrible. But we did that for about a year, and we finally got pregnant, and we were really excited. Still, kind of shocked that it took that long to get there, but we were really excited that we finally got there after all of this, and felt like it was worth it. And we told everybody. I think that was mistake number one. We told everybody pretty early on because it never occurred to us that we would possibly lose a baby. And so we go in for our 13-week appointment, and they're going in to check everything, and we find out that the baby's heartbeat had stopped. And at some point in the last few weeks, I think my first appointment was at like 9 weeks. So at some point between 9 and 12, the baby's heartbeat had stopped and we had lost it. And I remember being really upset, but I also remember just being really angry that I don't feel like our doctors in particular did a very good job of telling us what was going on or what we were seeing. I remember It's funny that I laugh now because at the moment I was obviously not happy about it. But I remember just being in disbelief because, they're doing the ultrasound and the doctor goes, "So, yeah." And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, so yeah, there's a baby in there. Like, I know I can see it. Like, I don't know what I'm looking at. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a professional. Like, I'm going to need more words from you than that. um, and so they tell us that the baby's heartbeat stopped and they just kind of like leave it hanging there. And so then they kind of told us, like, your body will get rid of it on its own. And if it doesn't within a certain number of days, then you'll have to come back in and we'll have to schedule a DNC. But, generally, your body will just take care of it. And I'm like, okay, like what does that mean? And they're like, oh, it's just going to be like a really painful period. I'm like, okay, I can do that. I can handle that. This is terrible, but like, I know what to expect now. Like, I'm one of those people that, like, if I know what to expect, it makes it a lot easier for me. Well, that is not what it is like. That is absolutely not what it is like. They did not prepare me that you would actually see it. I was not expecting that at all. They didn't tell you what to do after. Like, what do you do? What now? Like, I'm sitting in my bathroom, like, crying. Like, now what do I do? Like, nothing. Like, they did not prepare me at all for what I was experiencing. And I feel like the situation was definitely made worse by the lack of knowledge and kind of in a weird way, like lack of support from my medical team. Like, they just like, I guess it's so routine and like every day for them or something. Like, at least that's how I tell myself now. Like, it's just so like, that's just life for them that they don't really think about it. Like how earth shattering that is for someone who's never been through it. And then we had to take a couple months off because your body needs time to recover, both physically and mentally from what, had just happened. And we went back through it and got pregnant again on like the first or second cycle of that one. And same thing happened. We lost it again, but we weren't as far along. And we kind of knew not to like mentally attach too much, just because we had our guards up from before. And then we took some time off of that one and then did it again and got pregnant again and then lost it again. And this was all within the span of like 6 months. We had all three kind of back to back conceptions and losses all back to back in 6 months. And I really struggled in the beginning because I was so alone and so like almost ashamed that like my body did not work the way a woman's body is supposed to work. And for a while after the first one, I didn't really talk to anyone. I didn't share my story. I didn't anything because I was embarrassed and I was angry and I felt like no one understood. But I think the thing that helped me the most is I started doing my own research and I started reading about other people's experiences. I started following, there was a couple people that I started following like on Instagram and stuff like that who had similar stories or were accounts dedicated to people with similar stories. And I feel like that really helped me because it made me feel like I wasn't broken. I wasn't alone. There wasn't something wrong with me. Like it was an experience that other people have. It wasn't just me. And that really helped a lot because yeah, before that I felt completely alone. Then we had one more shot because with the hormone treatments, at least the ones we were on, I don't know all of it because I know there's a ton of different ways to get pregnant and go through infertility, but at least the path that we were on, we had literally one more cycle before we had to either change it up and do something else or call it quits. And so my husband and I decided we were going to give it one more shot. And we got pregnant again. And then we went in at like 10 and they were all these ones after the first loss, they were monitoring much more closely. And so we were like at the doctor's always, I swear I should have my own room there. We were getting, lab works and stuff like that to make sure my numbers were good and all that stuff so they could track it a lot more closely. And so we were there, I think it was about 10 weeks, if I'm remembering my timeline correctly. And they did like blood work and they said that my numbers had dropped and were not going in the right direction and that I needed to prepare for another miscarriage. And I was like, okay, well, clearly this path is not working. Maybe I'm not meant to have kids. I don't know what's going on, but I give up. Like I can't go through this anymore. It's just too emotional. And a few weeks later, we had to call the doctor and go in for an appointment because my body had not done what it was supposed to do. And we go in and to our surprise, baby was still there and alive and kicking. And so, yeah, we ended up being pregnant. And at that point, it was, I think, 12, probably around the 12, 14 mark again, when we went in to schedule the DNC. And luckily, obviously, didn't schedule anything. And so we went through that pregnancy, and it was rough. I also had hyperemesis, so I had a terrible pregnancy to begin with. But I also feel like mentally it was really hard because I I kind of missed it. Like I wouldn't let myself believe that it was actually happening. I didn't want to bond with the baby when the baby kicked. I just tried to ignore that it was happening. My husband didn't really want to be a part of it either, like because we didn't want to get our hopes up and get attached to this again. It was really hard for us, and I feel like we kind of got robbed of that pregnancy joy that we should have had once we finally got pregnant because of all of our losses prior. You can use my cell phone. You can find me on Instagram. I have my Confessions of a Tiny Teacher. I have an email, Tasha at confessionsofattinyteacher.com. Like literally anything, anything. Reach out to me. Like I am literally an open book at this point, and I have been through quite a bit, and I know that my experience is not the same as everyone else's, and it's probably not even identical to anyone's. But having somebody that you feel like you can talk to that's not biased or invested, I feel like is really, really helpful. And so finding your person, and I'm totally happy to be that person that gets it and is supportive and kind of knows there's not really a right thing to say. So I don't want to say they know the right thing to say, but just, yeah, finding your person or people or community or whatever of people who have been through it or, have experiences to share that you can lean on is really helpful, because feeling alone is what I feel like crushed me more in the beginning than anything.
I'm Pam. I have two boys. They are currently 7 and 3. I live in Southwest Washington. I am a self-employed designer, and let's see. We'd always planned on 2 kids. We did want them about 3 years apart, and didn't quite happen that way. Close, but not quite. I had a really easy first pregnancy, and then my body just kind of got weird after I had our first. And by that I mean when my period finally came back after breastfeeding for over a year, a little bit over a year. It just felt wrong. Like I don't know how to explain it exactly. It wasn't right. I had been really regular and really normal when it comes to that sort of thing my whole life. We got pregnant immediately with the first one, and trying like 1 month, I was so regular. I knew exactly when I was pregnant because it was the first time I had ever been a day late of my period in my entire life. That being said, I had gone to the doctor a couple of times, in that postpartum period and everything. And just to kind of see, if they thought that there was something going on, and they assured me that no, that's totally normal. Your body, everything changes, including menstruation periods and patterns and all of that. So, I didn't really worry about it, but it just seemed off. So by the time we decided to start trying again, I didn't get pregnant as easily, obviously. And it took a couple of months, which I understand is still not a stretch by any means. But by the time I thought that I was probably pregnant, I took a lot of pregnancy tests this time. Like, it was really faint. And so, okay, well, let's try it again, because at that point it's kind of fun to pee on a stick. And they just were all really light, and that was kind of surprising, I guess. But that I was pregnant, it was cool. We were excited and happy, and we kind of told more people this time more quickly. Not a lot still, because I've always been a little nervous about that sort of thing. But I don't know how to explain this in a way that makes sense to anybody outside of my brain, but I felt like it was wrong the whole time. Like, I felt like there was just something wrong. It wasn't, I don't know. I hadn't had any feelings of doubt about the baby's health or anything, with my first son when I was pregnant with him. Everything was just normal fears and anticipations and all of the, oh my gosh, I've never been pregnant before, this is so weird, like all of these things are happening with my body. And I had those this time, but they were just terrified feelings that it was just something wrong. And, I would spend a lot of time just crying in the bathroom, like how I felt like whether it was going to be a disability or it just, wasn't going to work out for what I just spent a lot of time like not knowing how I was going to be able to do this. And it was really hard to reckon with, with myself, just like how do you feel this way about a baby that hasn't even been born yet? I was a terrible mother. Like, am I going to love this baby if there's something wrong with it? I went through a lot of really difficult emotions. And so anyway, went to the doctor, at like 6 weeks and verified that, yeah, I was pregnant, and, just kept telling myself that I was overreacting. Like all of this was just fear because I already had a first child and now it was a whole second child thing. And it was just my brain playing tricks on me. Everything was fine. Like, come on, Pam, just get it together. You're totally overreacting, which I tend to do sometimes. So by the time we went in for the 10-week appointment that they were going to do the actual ultrasound, my husband went with me, and we actually brought our then 2.5-year-old, I guess he was. And so he was too young to really understand what was going on. We were at the doctor and he was playing with Dad. I'm not sure why I brought either of them to that appointment. I guess I felt like I needed some moral support because I had just been dreading that appointment. And it was, again, one of those that I couldn't explain, I couldn't understand. I just was dreading going to that appointment. And it wasn't one of those like, oh yeah, we get to hear the baby's heartbeat. It was just a terrified, oh God. Is everything okay? Like, I just want to make sure everything's okay. And so we went, and she started doing she did the ultrasound, and it was the one with the wand, the fun one, I remember, how blank her face was. I don't know how doctors deliver that news because they have to do it so often. I never really thought about how often they must have to do that. But, if a fourth of early pregnancies fail, they have to give this news a lot. And I just remember, her just saying, well, I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat. Let me go. I have to go get a second doctor to give a second opinion right here now. And I remember looking over at my husband, and he was holding our son in his lap, and his face was so white, and I was trying my best to just keep it together, but for my son was there. I didn't want him to he didn't know what was going on. And that's something you can't really explain to a toddler. So, we were doing our best to just look at each other, but not look at each other, and just, really, man, hold it together. So, the other doctor came in and confirmed that, yeah, the baby had been lost. But then they also said that it hadn't grown past 6 weeks, which means that, like, right after the first time I went in and verified it, it had miscarried. And so that was a weird feeling too, and so, they basically said, you can either just wait to naturally, or you can come in for a D&C and we'll take care of it for you. And it was just like, yeah, that, like, immediate, like, right now. This is very invasive at this point. Let's move this along. So I ended up going and making an appointment for the next day. My husband and I went in, and it was a long day. We sat there in a waiting room for 5 hours almost. Yeah, that's a long time to kind of think about what's happening in your life right there. I have so much just overwhelming emotional support for people who go through this numerous times. I don't know how they keep doing it. And I wish nobody had to go through it, but I understand why, you keep trying. It was a lot of emotions, because I was really relieved. I felt just incredibly relieved because I had known something was wrong, and I was really proud of my body for working correctly. I was just really glad that that hadn't worked, that part of my body hadn't worked, but then the rest of it did its job. And if it wasn't going to be a viable pregnancy, it ended. And that was relieving, is literally the best word I can use for that. And I think it was also really interesting after that after the D&C and after I healed and all of that, my periods went back to normal immediately. It was almost like my body hadn't healed completely from the first pregnancy, And so it really honestly needed that reboot. We had a rough couple of months after that, it was kind of like, well, when do we try again? And the doctor was basically like, you're free to try again as soon as, I don't even remember at this point, like what the exact weeks that we could start, but that was scary, We just went through this and it was obviously difficult, and it was really hard to come to terms with your body not following through on this plan that you thought was happening. But we did start trying again after about 3 months, and sure enough, we got pregnant like immediately again. But mentally, I never ever had any of those doubts. They just didn't exist, and I kept expecting and waiting for him, and they just never happened. And so that was one of those where I'm like, okay, like this one's gonna be fine. And it's just that instinctual, I know it's fine, that I had with the first one. So yeah, trust yourself. You are so not alone. Like, it was something that people didn't really talk about that much, or I didn't notice people talking about it that much until I went through it. And it was kind of like, this is so natural, and I don't want to say normal, but it is. I mean, it's a normal thing that happens, and it's common, and it's way more common than you think. And talk about it. Talk about those feelings. You're gonna find so much support if you just say it out loud. It was amazing. I had no idea. I didn't know about rainbow babies, I'd never heard that term before. Then the first time, after we went through this, I heard it, and it was just an outpouring of, oh, me too, this happened. Like, people don't want to talk about it, but I don't know why they don't talk about it. Like, it's so normal. And that's kind of my advice there. Like, you're not alone, and it doesn't need to be shameful.
Each of these women have a happy ending to their stories, and we realize that there are plenty who do not. The sentiment remains the same, though. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You are not broken, and you are certainly 100% not alone. Not by a long shot. The Niam Project podcast is produced and edited by me, Ariana Bradford. We can be found at weareniam.com or on Facebook and Instagram under the Niam Project. Thank you again for tuning in to us today, and we'll see you next time.